I've had some really interesting conversations about the whole homework debate lately, and I wanted to just share some of my thoughts on this debate. So, obviously, really, when you look at the research, it is pretty unclear as to whether or not homework is beneficial or what it's beneficial for. And I think that asking the question of is homework effective is really the wrong question to be asking, because homework is just a container for working on skills, and a container is only as effective as the things that you put in it. So I think even when we're thinking about kids who need certain accommodations, who maybe need homework assignments shortened, or maybe we're considering whether or not we should put those accommodations in place, I think that we really need to back up and just think about what is the point in what we're doing? What is the point of school in general? So, the thing about homework is that if people are going to make a sweeping statement and say it isn't effective, I obviously am not a proponent of pointless worksheets and, kids spending hours and hours doing homework every night and doing mindless busy work. Obviously, we don't want to do that. But I'm a little bit concerned when people say homework's not effective, we should completely do away with it. Because there are other things that research shows are actually beneficial for kids. Now, whether that work is done at home, it kind of depends on the situation. We know that reading is something that's beneficial for kids. So, are the things that you're asking kids to do at home, is it reading? Well, if that's what the homework is, we know that that's beneficial for kids. What about project-based learning, long-term projects, things that kids have to plan over the course of multiple days and multiple weeks? Does it make sense for them to do some of that research in class and then sometimes take some of that work home because maybe they've planned and realized, you know what, I'm not going to get all of this done in study hall and I might have to do some of it after school? Does it make sense for them to do some of that at home? Well, if that's what homework is, then that actually makes sense, and that's something that could be beneficial for kids. And then the other thing is that when we get out into the workforce, or when we go to college, for example, there is a lot of independent learning that needs to happen outside of class. And whether or not that independent learning happens in study hall, whether it makes sense for it to happen outside of class when kids are at home, well, that kind of depends on the logistics of the situation. So yes, I think in some contexts, it does make sense for there to be some work done outside of school. Do kids need strategic practice with certain skills in math or reading? We know that that works. So if that's what the homework is, that might make sense. So I don't think asking the question of is homework effective is even the right question to be asking. What we really need to ask is what skills do kids need? What experiences do kids need? And how do we arrange them so that kids get all of these experiences they need to be successful in adulthood? And does that make sense for that to sometimes happen at home? I'd argue that in a lot of situations, it might. So it really just depends. And I think that it is a lot to ask of schools to completely reform their homework policies. But what we can start to do right now is that maybe for those kids where we can see that the current homework situation is clearly not working for them, and maybe they have a 504 plan or an IEP in place, and we can make those adjustments, maybe we can keep these other questions in mind when we're figuring out how to make those accommodations and how to make the homework load meaningful for them. I hope that schools start to think about it in this way and think about not just let's make homework happen just for the sake of doing homework, but really thinking about what experiences kids need to have throughout the course of their educational experience. So I talk about a lot of these topics on the De Facto Leaders podcast. I've got some great guests coming up this fall where we do have some discussions on project-based learning, homework policies, and all kinds of other things that are relevant to educational reform. So if you haven't already, go to defactoleaders.com and check out some of the episodes, or follow De Facto Leaders wherever you get your podcasts.